Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going to be diving deep into something I think a lot of you are probably thinking about these days, and that's Canada's immigration system. It's definitely a hot topic, one that's pretty complex and always changing. So today we're going to try to break down some of the key issues and maybe some potential solutions based on an analysis we found. It's on the Canada Immigration YouTube channel.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we thought it'd be good to kind of dig into that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Canada's immigration system, it was considered a model for a lot of other countries. It was efficient, attracting skilled workers, and there was generally a lot of support for it from Canadians.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely contributed to Canada's economic growth and I think to its cultural vibrancy too. But it seems like lately things are hitting a breaking point,
Yeah.
And this analysis that we're looking at, it kind of highlights some of those cracks in the foundation.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues, honestly, is housing. After COVID, the government really increased immigration to try to deal with the labor shortages, which, on the surface, it seemed like a good idea, right? Boost the economy, fill those gaps in the workforce.
Yeah, totally. But I'm having trouble understanding how, they thought this huge influx of newcomers was going to work when we already have a lack of affordable housing.
Yeah, that's a big point, right? The analysis points out that this sudden increase, and it was well-intentioned, but it really put a strain on the housing market, especially in Toronto and Vancouver. We're talking rent increases of over 20% in just 1 year.
Wow, 20%. That's wild. Imagine, coming to a new country full of hope for a new life, and then you realize that you can't even afford a decent place to live. I mean, it's heartbreaking. And I think it really highlights those unintended consequences that can happen when you change policies without thinking everything through.
Oh, for sure. It disproportionately impacts low and middle income families, forces a lot of people into really tough living situations. And this isn't just a problem for newcomers. It impacts people who've been living in Canada for their whole lives. Everyone's competing for affordable housing, and a lot of people are feeling the pressure.
So how did the government respond to that? I mean, didn't they decide to scale back the number of immigrants they were letting in?
Yeah, they did. The Liberal government has announced that they're going to reduce the targets for immigration, trying to, ease up on the pressure a bit.
But isn't population growth really important for the Canadian economy? How do we balance those two things?
That's the million-dollar question, right? The analysis argues that this move might provide some short-term relief, but it doesn't actually get to the root of the problem, and it could even lead to a population decline in the next few years, which would be a big change for Canada because historically, immigration has really been a key part of our growth.
Yeah, it does make you wonder if these are just temporary band-aids on a much bigger problem.
Exactly, and while housing is a major concern, it's not the only challenge that the system's facing. One thing the analysis also looks at is the strain on Canada's refugee system. Right now, there's a backlog of over 260,000 refugee claims that are just waiting to be processed.
Oh, wow. I remember waiting for months to get my passport renewed a few years back, and I was so frustrated. I can't imagine the stress and uncertainty of being an asylum seeker and having to wait for years. In this kind of limbo.
It's a huge backlog, and it creates all sorts of ethical and logistical dilemmas. It raises questions about fairness and efficiency, and the analysis even suggests that these really long processing times might actually encourage people to make weak claims or even false claims.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if people know it might take years for their claim to be processed, and even if they don't have a strong case, they might figure, hey, I can stay in Canada while I wait.
Exactly. It makes an already overloaded system even more complicated.
So we've got this housing crisis, we've got a refugee system that's totally backlogged. What other problems does this analysis point out?
Well, one thing is that border security has become a growing concern, especially with how U.S. immigration policies have been changing.
Right, yeah, when the U.S. started being more strict with their enforcement, under Trump, we saw a lot more migrants trying to get into Canada.
Yeah, exactly. And this brings up this really complicated issue of trying to balance Canada's obligations, under international refugee law, with the need to also protect our own borders.
Yeah, so it's like a moral dilemma, right? You want to be compassionate, but you also have to be practical.
Exactly. And then it gets even more complicated when you factor in how much the government is getting involved in the labor market, with these targeted immigration policies. And this is where things get really interesting and potentially concerning,
Yeah.
What we're seeing is kind of a shift away from what used to be the points-based system, which really focused on skilled immigrants.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
But can you just remind me what that was all about?
Yeah, basically, potential immigrants were given points, based on things like their education, their work experience, how well they spoke English or French, their age, those kinds of things. And then whoever had the highest scores, they were the ones who got priority to come into Canada. The whole idea was to try and attract people who could fit right into the Canadian economy.
So it sounds like they were looking for people who could start contributing right away.
Exactly. But now the government's getting a lot more involved in the labor market. They're using these targeted immigration policies to try and fine-tune immigration to address specific needs.
So instead of just focusing on whoever has the best skills, they're basically picking and choosing immigrants based on what businesses are saying they need at that moment.
Yeah, you got it. It's moving away from that broader approach of just trying to get the most talented people, and it's becoming more reactive, like trying to plug holes as they pop up. But the problem is those needs can change really quickly, and all this tweaking can make things really unpredictable for everyone.
The analysis actually says that this could end up hurting the quality of the newcomers coming to Canada. That's a pretty big claim.
It is, but it's a valid point. If we're not putting as much emphasis on skills and qualifications anymore, it makes you wonder about what these immigrants will be able to contribute to the economy in the long run. Are we setting them up for success, or are we putting them in a position where they're more likely to be affected by, economic downturns or changes in the job market?
It makes me think about the gig economy, and how many people are struggling with these unstable jobs. Are we creating a situation where immigrants are more likely to end up in those kinds of jobs?
It's definitely a possibility, and it's something the people making these policies really need to think about. Are we giving newcomers enough support and training to help them adapt to these changes in the job market? Or are we just throwing them into a system that's getting harder and harder to navigate?
The analysis also talks about this trend of using the immigration system to let international students stay in Canada, even if they wouldn't normally qualify for residency.
Yeah, that's another area where things are getting a bit blurry. International students are great for Canada, They contribute to the economy, they bring new ideas to our universities, and they often have valuable skills.
For sure. But if the immigration system is being used as a way for students to get permanent residency when they wouldn't normally qualify, doesn't that make things unfair?
That's the concern. It raises questions about whether the system is fair and transparent. If the rules can be bent for some people, it erodes trust in the whole system. And it can create resentment, from Canadians and other newcomers who feel like they've been treated unfairly.
It sounds like we're moving further and further away from the things that made Canada's immigration system so successful in the past.
Yeah, that's a major point the analysis is making. They're saying that all these missteps and changes in policy have really pushed the system to a breaking point.
So what needs to happen? What would a better approach to immigration look like? One that's more sustainable and ethical?
The analysis says we need to get back to the basic principles that used to guide the system. Things like focusing on skilled individuals, making sure temporary residents and refugees have the support they need, and making sure the process is fair and efficient for everyone.
So it's about finding that balance between what the economy needs, what our values are, and actually being welcoming to people who want to make Canada their home. But how do we even start to deal with all these problems? I mean, it feels like we're at a crossroads, right? Like we have this idea of Canada as a welcoming country that embraces diversity. But at the same time, we have these real problems, like the housing crisis and a system that seems like it's really struggling.
Yeah, it's complicated for sure, but I don't think it's hopeless. The important thing is to stop focusing on these quick fixes and these politically motivated decisions and start thinking about the long term.
Okay, so what would that look like? What do we actually need to do?
Yeah. Well, one thing is we need to be honest about how much we can actually handle. Like, how many newcomers can Canada realistically take in each year and still make sure they have access to all the things they need, housing, healthcare, education?
Yeah, that's a big question, and I don't think there's an easy answer.
Nope, you're right. It takes a lot of careful planning and analysis. You have to think about things like economic growth, infrastructure development, and how the needs and resources are different in different parts of the country.
Okay, and this analysis also talked about how we need to go back to prioritizing skilled immigrants. But wouldn't that leave out a lot of people who are just looking for a better life for themselves and their families?
That's a good point, and that's where the idea of balance is really important. We need a system that recognizes that different people can contribute in different ways. Skilled workers are important for the economy, but so are entrepreneurs, caregivers, people who fill essential jobs in our communities.
So it's not just about what skills someone has, but also their potential to contribute to Canadian society in all sorts of ways.
Exactly. We need a more well-rounded approach that looks beyond just the economic side of things
Yeah.
and considers the social and cultural benefits that immigrants bring.
And what about the humanitarian side of things? How do we balance being practical with our commitment to helping refugees?
That's where having a refugee system that actually works is so important. We need a system that can process claims quickly and fairly, that can provide support to people who are truly fleeing persecution, but that can also prevent people from taking advantage of the system.
It sounds like a lot of this comes down to having the political will to make these changes and having the resources to do it.
Absolutely. It takes a commitment from all levels of government to make immigration a priority.
Yeah.
Because it's a key part of Canada's future success and well-being.
And that's where you come in, listeners. What do you think is the most important thing for a successful immigration system? Is it about the economy? Is it about humanitarian concerns? Is it about social cohesion? Or is it something else entirely? We really encourage you to keep thinking about these issues because it's a complex topic that's always changing.
As we've seen today, Canada's immigration system is facing some serious challenges, but it also offers incredible opportunities. By having these conversations, by questioning our assumptions, and by speaking up for policies that reflect our values, we can help create a future where immigration continues to make Canada a better place.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some new things to think about and maybe even a bit of hope. Remember, the future of Canada's immigration system is in all of our hands. Until next time, stay curious.